Welcome to the WakeUp Protocol. I am your host, Nadja Haldimann, and together we're having life-changing conversations with real people about spiritual awakening and the transformations that follow. We're mapping the messy path of awakening so you can go further, faster, and feel a little less alone along the way. For this episode of the WakeUp Protocol, I'm joined by Cori Lovejoy, a cultural connector, spiritual seeker, and deeply thoughtful human who has lived life on both sides of a binary most of us never question. Cori spent nearly 5 decades navigating the world in a male body, while carrying a truth she didn't yet have language for, a truth shaped by shame, fear, and relentless self-suppression. Her awakening didn't arrive gently. It came through plant medicine, profound inner reckoning, and moments where staying alive required choosing courage over everything familiar. What followed was not just a gender transition, but a spiritual one, a journey into self-love, embodiment, and what it truly means to be human in this world. In this conversation, we explore shame and sovereignty, consciousness and contrast, living beyond binaries, and the power of choosing to stay. Cori also shares how her work at the intersection of style, art, and community has become a living expression of belonging, visibility, and human connection. This episode is an invitation to human better, to soften, to listen, and to remember that anything is possible when we choose to live from truth instead of fear.
But from there to coming out as a transgender woman and really sort of owning this identity has been a long process. Immediately, it took me to a place where by 4 or 5 months after this experience, I was ready to check out. I was like, I'm done humaning. I have had a good life. I've had a great experience. In many ways, have lived a very successful life in a man's world. And I thought it was impossible for me to come out. It just didn't seem feasible given my situation in my work and my marriage and my life. And so that led me to a very, very deep depression in which I frankly wanted to end my life rather than come out. And the night I went from thinking about ending my life to actually making plans, I got another download and I heard it very clearly. Cori, you're not afraid to die. Why are you afraid to live?
Cori Lovejoy, welcome to the WakeUp Protocol.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been excited about this. And my pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gosh, what a journey you've been on. We have become really good friends over the last year. And you were originally assigned male by birth and went through an incredible journey. And I met you as a female. And maybe to start, can you share a little bit about who you are and how you got to that place where you realize that you're no longer relating to the male body identity that you were born into?
Yeah. Well, it starts way, way back. I had always wished that I was born a girl. And from the very first memories that I have, and that was the only thing I was ever conscious of with respect to being trans. I identify as a transgender woman. And I spent my entire life wishing I was a girl, and that was something that felt very shameful. And I pushed it away. I ignored it. I did everything I could to not recognize that, while at the same time trying to understand myself and make sense of this. And then I lived 48 years as a man in a man's world, married, 2 kids, in a very male-dominated industry, and then I had a remarkable experience with plant medicine and got my eyes opened, as I say, by the universe. My face was rubbed in the fact I got this, what I call a download. You're a girl. And the moment I got that download during this plant medicine experience, I immediately had the feeling that I was a girl and just felt incredible euphoria, followed by an oh shit. Like, I was very inconvenient truth, but it made sense to me. And it clarified a lot of the experiences I've had, and it really connected the dots to a pattern. And that started this awakening, I'll say, to this identity. And that was, 6 years ago now. And here I am, you never fully transition, I should say that, but feeling like I am out of the woods, so to speak, and ready to kind of get my life back on track as a woman. It's been a bit of a harrowing journey to this point.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And what comes up for me is you experienced reality in this paradigm, in this world that we're living in as a male for 5 decades. And now you're experiencing it from the viewpoint of a female. And I'm just curious if there is a difference in how you lived, how you were perceived in the patriarchy, in the business world as a man versus a woman, and maybe also how your relationships have changed because of that.
Yeah. Well, I like to talk about this. There's different ways I can talk about this experience and the changes, because it's been at a physical level, it's been at an emotional level, it's been at a social level, and I'll say at a spiritual level. And in each of those cases, and just overall, I can't emphasize enough how different the world feels to me. Cars are still cars, houses are still houses, trees are still trees. But the best way I can describe it is that it feels like going from black and white to technicolor or something like that, or the difference between watching a movie and having that experience. It is really remarkable how much more I feel, how much more connected I am with my body, with the earth, with women, and with other people. I've said this before, but this is perhaps the most remarkable and least expected aspect of this transition, is the relationships that I have with women, and including yourself. The depth of the relationship, the emotional connection, the support, the love that I feel, the empathy that I feel surrounds me. And it's very much in contrast to my experience as a man. I had deep relationships as a man, but I never could have fathomed the connections that were available to me in women's circles and in these friendships, and yourself included. It's really rather remarkable, and it actually makes me sad, to be honest, and sad that men don't have this due to, I think, honestly, our social conditioning. And it makes me angry because of this social conditioning and the way I was raised, and the way men, and especially in my vintage, were raised and before me. And it's rather upsetting, honestly.
I have only experienced being in a female body, but I was very much in a male world, working as a user experience designer for 25 years in many, many teams where I was the only woman. There were definitely teams where there were women, but there were many times where I was the only woman. And I had to become quite masculine. And so even for me, I feel like there has been a bit of a transition from stepping out of the masculine into more of the feminine. And you are actually a huge part of introducing me to a really powerful group of women here in Bellingham. And just kind of thinking about the difference between the male and the female relationships, what do you notice are some of the biggest differences there?
Well, it started with acceptance. It felt very awkward for me in male relationships to transition. And I lost really all but one close relationship with men. And so that was, of course, heart-wrenching. But I immediately felt accepted as myself. I was very fortunate to meet some amazing ladies right on in my journey. And then, as you said, this group of ladies here in Bellingham. And I mean, it really starts with acceptance and connection, and then all the way to what I'll say is unconditional love. And there's this maturation process that happens, at least it happened for me in transitioning, where I felt very much like a young girl. And as I've matured into womanhood, every single step of the way I've been supported, mentored by women. And I feel like I've been raised by an amazing group of women. And I honestly owe them, you all, I'll say, my life, because I can quite honestly say I would not be here but for several women in particular, and probably the whole experience of being accepted. When I first came out, I thought my challenges were going to be kind of with the world rather than with my family and close friends, and I was completely wrong. There are challenges for me being in the world as a woman, and I never know if what I experience is transphobia or just good old-fashioned misogyny. But being accepted by women has been just the joy of my life, honestly, and my reason for living at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really powerful to have this connection with women who got your back and really are here to support you rather than trying to be competitive with each other and one-upping each other. So there's a huge difference between that. And I'm really feeling that with all the beautiful women that are surrounding us these days. You often talk about humaning. What do you mean by that?
Being a human on this earth constrained most of the time to this 3D world. And I think I got that term from my oldest, and I just love it. And the focus of my life is trying to human better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talked about Earth School or just being in school, kind of like what Ram Dass is talking about, that we're in school here and we're supposed to be doing this human thing. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Ram Dass, it looks like he says, you're in school, take the curriculum. He talks about how he's been trying to find enlightenment in his life and sort of escape this human experience, and tells it very eloquently. We're in school, take the curriculum. And so for me, what it looks like is being present. I've come to the conclusion just in the last year that I no longer make any distinction between the sacred and the mundane. This life is sacred, and humaning is sacred, and humaning is a spiritual journey. My own sort of myth or story about this world is that my soul incarnated with intention and purpose into this world for a reason, and I am trying to encourage myself gently to stay in this body, in this world, in this present, and not try to escape. And whether that's a literal escape or whether that's sort of disassociation and metaphorically escaping through different means, substances or whatever. And I've tried, believe me, I've tried many, many ways to escape this experience as a human. And finally, I'm just like, as a Ram Dass, I'm just like, I'm here. I'm going to learn what I can learn. I think that's my mission here.
Mm-hmm.
And learning to become a better human, which to me is waking up to our true nature as loving, compassionate souls encountering other souls.
Okay, waking up to a true nature. A lot of people talk about embodying when they're waking up. So you're saying waking up to a true nature. Can you go into a little bit more detail with that?
Well, I think we exist at several levels, or as you say, vibrations, which I think makes sense. There's clearly this corporeal body in this 3D world. And then there's the ineffable and the existence of our spirit or our soul. And when I drop into that space and can feel that, I understand that my existence, our existence, is much, much greater than just what we see, feel, and experience in our normal sort of waking consciousness. And when we become more conscious and we become more aware, we start to see the connections of everything. And to me, where it's led is a unity of everything, and in particularly of our consciousness. I think of my existence as both the wave and the ocean as much as I can, and try to remind myself that I am also this soul, this infinite entity that is timeless and always in the infinite present.
That timeless part of our soul that's always there. And then this individuated experience that we're going through in this 3D body that we're living right now. You have done some Buddhist practices over the years, and how has Buddhism influenced who you are today?
Well, through meditation practices, other Buddhist practices, loving kindness practices, compassion practices, that has really been my path to myself. Sitting with myself and experiencing myself from a different vantage point. What I've gotten from meditation and the study I've done of Buddhism is that in sitting with ourself and not running away from our experience as a human being, cultivating this sense that viewing myself from the vantage point of this spirit or soul or this infinite entity. I struggle with the language, I struggle with the words, but I think that we have this true nature and true awareness. To me, it's universal consciousness. And the more I can tap into that, the more I can observe. We talk about the observer self. I can observe my human experience and identify less with that. And it gives me space to maneuver, and it gives me perspective. And I mean, I say all this fully recognizing that most of the time I do identify with my emotions or my body, and I do get sucked away. And as Alan Watts says, there's a lot of fun in the attachment to this world, but periodically popping out, or the more I can sort of maintain this foot in groundedness in that true nature, I feel the smoother my life goes.
Yeah. Self-love is something we have talked about a lot. And you choosing your current identity is a huge part of finding and aligning with that self-love. What did that journey look like for you about really finding that self-love?
Yeah, I told my story of transitioning many different ways. As I said, at the physical level, the cognitive level, emotional level, social level. But it's really at the spiritual level that I've loved talking about this in the way I make the most sense of it. And I describe that spiritual journey as loving myself, learning to love myself. And that is the thing that makes the most sense of this journey and the common thread through this. So in order for me to come out as a transgender woman, I had to first come out to myself. I had to first accept this part of myself. And there's a path to, I'll say, and this is influenced by Buddhism and meditation, is first awareness, first becoming aware of these parts. And I think a lot of the reason that my journey has resonated with other people, because I think as humans, as we're all humaning, I think this journey to self and loving ourselves is a human experience. And so a lot of people identify with that. But the first step, in my opinion, is becoming aware of these parts of ourselves that we, for whatever reason, don't want to accept. They're shameful, they're painful, whatever. And so we ignore them, we push them away. And so once we become aware of them, then the task becomes to accept them, accept those parts of ourselves. And for me, just sort of recognizing, there is this huge part of me that wishes I was a woman, and treating that with some loving kindness, treating myself with some loving kindness, and moving from awareness and acceptance to appreciation, appreciating this part of myself and adoring this part of myself, which is self-love. And it's a journey I'm very much still on. But in this path towards humaning, I don't believe we can really truly love others until we have loved ourselves. And at least I've found that in my experience. The more I can accept myself and give myself unconditional love, all the parts, the more I can empathize with other people and all their parts. I feel less judgmental. I feel more empathic. I feel more compassionate and generally at peace. For so long, I was at war with myself. And I choose that word intentionally. It was a battle with myself, and I did everything I could to run away and not to stop and look inside. And back to the Buddhism is what that has given me a clear path towards self-love and loving kindness. There are multiple paths, and that just happened to be the one that I took. And yeah. I'll say just one teacher in particular, Pema Chodron. I've never sat with personally, but have consumed as much of her content as I can. And so I think it is important in any of these discussions to sort of discuss our lineage or whatever, or where we've gotten our teachings. And Pema Chodron is one. And as we mentioned, Ram Dass.
Yeah, she's a beautiful Buddhist teacher. I read a few of her books too. I should rather say I listened to them on Audible. So there has been a moment in your life where it went from I am identifying as male to I'm identifying as female. When did that happen and how?
Well, first of all, it wasn't a moment. It was a process.
Okay.
And so there was that experience that I mentioned with the plant medicine and this epiphany or download. But then from there to coming out as a transgender woman and really sort of owning this identity has been a long process. Immediately, it took me to a place where by 4 or 5 months after this experience, I was ready to check out. I was like, I'm done humaning. I have had a good life. I've had a great experience. In many ways, have lived a very successful life in a man's world. And I thought it was impossible for me to come out. It just didn't seem feasible given my situation in my work and my marriage and my life. And so that led me to a very, very deep depression in which I frankly wanted to end my life rather than come out. And the night I went from thinking about ending my life to actually making plans, I got another download. And I heard it very clearly. Cori, you're not afraid to die. Why are you afraid to live? And that was another sort of like grandmotherly swat into the rear to like wake me up. And it's like, I've always fancied myself as a courageous person. And that kind of got me fired up to be like, who are you calling afraid? Like, I'm going to do this thing. So I started to come out gradually. And it wasn't just like, hey, world, I'm a transgender woman. It started as gender questioning out loud. Like, what am I? The male thing doesn't feel right. I've always wanted to be a woman. I hadn't found that fact pattern, or that experience didn't feel the same as other stories of transgender women that I have read and heard about. So I didn't immediately think I was a transgender woman. It's taken some time. I mean, for the longest time, I thought I was a mentally ill, cisgender, heterosexual man with a mental illness. That this felt to me like a mental illness. And it was so shameful. I never told anybody. I never even wrote about it in my private journals. And to come to the place where I am a perfectly normal transgender woman has been a journey. And it's taken me to some very dark places, some low lows and some high highs.
Find it interesting, the word shame that you're mentioning, because on the Hawkins levels of consciousness scale, shame is literally the lowest frequency. And then it goes all the way up to love, joy, peace, enlightenment. And so living in that place of shame and being able to recognize that and changing that in your life must have been a really empowering experience, even though it's also very, very difficult to acknowledge that and say yes to that. So you had that moment. When do you feel was that pivotal moment of your spiritual awakening? What exactly happened?
Well, I would like to come back to that. But before I do, I want to mention something about shame and where we are as a society and how we've gotten here as a culture. I believe that shame is the way we enforce our morals. Well, let me just make it more specific. I think that the man code, there is a very strict, unwritten code, what it's like to be a man, how you're supposed to be a man. And it's very rigid and it's very strict. And shame is the way you enforce this. And I go back to my early childhood where in my day, the worst thing you could call, a boy could call another boy is a girl. Don't be a girl. Don't be a girl. That was the worst insult, to be labeled as a girl, to be labeled as gay. And so that enforcement it's still with us. And you see it in the current administration, making fun of people. It's disgusting. But again, I won't say there was a pivotal moment. Sure, there's the epiphany that I had in the plant medicine experience. There's the coming very close to suicide a couple times. Last year, as I had a psychotic break, all of it has, I think, culminated in my current stance and recognizing the shame. But you're right, it's hard to sort of dig that out. I think Brene Brown, who I know you listen to and follow, was instrumental in me understanding shame, particularly as it relates to being male in this world. Yeah, I'll just say a little bit more, actually, as I think about it. I think it was exactly that. I think that it was exactly the shame that was keeping me from coming out. Because as I think about this, and I've said this before in many places, that in order for me to come out to myself, I had to first come to grips with my own transphobia. I mean, I'll be really frank. When I saw male-bodied people, men who I thought at that point dressed as women or presenting as women or female women, I just thought it was like, it really rubbed me the wrong. It was very uncomfortable. I won't say it was disgusting, but it was, it freaked me out, if I'm being honest. And it was this kind of bracing, barring, like I didn't have any interest. I didn't understand it. And then I'd see male-bodied people dressed as women on the streets, and some of them clearly had struggling with mental illness and were probably unhoused, some of them, judging by, their situations. And when I thought of transgender women, that's what I thought of. And so to the transphobia, to overcome that. And then as I transitioned into presenting and living as a woman, I was immediately confronted with my own internalized misogyny that I had to overcome. And this idea of like being a girl or being a woman, and kind of working my way out, as I know all women really have to do, to sort of get out of this very narrow, constrained view that we have as a culture of what a woman is and how they should behave and what their purpose is, etc.
Wow, that's so fascinating. And I can really relate to that. Transphobia, for me, it was different. I identify as heterosexual, and I could not imagine loving a woman the way I would love a man in terms of a relationship with a woman versus a man. And that was holding me back from loving myself, because I am a woman. I've shared that here before with somebody else in the past, but learning that I get to have permission to love a woman meant learning to have permission to love myself. And once I made that switch, everything changed. And I finally was able to deeply fall in love with me, which I am today. I love myself. And it's just so interesting how this conditioning from the world is telling us what we can and cannot do. And yeah, so shameful for a boy to don't be a girl. I mean, that's just part of the programming. I've heard it many times. Or, oh, you do this like a girl, just to shame each other. Versus for women, that's really different. When a woman is being called, oh yeah, you're doing this like a man, it's like, yeah, you're doing a good job. You're doing this right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what comes up for you when I share that about just how we're perceiving male versus female and how that translates into who we become as adults?
Yeah, two things come up. The first thing that comes up is your own story. I mean, my story is not exceptional in any way. This awakening and this coming to accept and appreciate and love this identity That's not exceptional in any way, I don't think, in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's rare, right? And so it's unique that way. And given like the political situation and the prevalence of transphobia in our culture, I mean, maybe my experience sticks out. But what you just said is the experience that I've run into and why my story resonates with so many people, especially the people who are doing this work and wanting to human better and wanting to wake up. That's the common denominator. We are on this journey towards loving ourselves. That's the first thing that comes up. The second thing that comes up is exactly this contrast. I have a therapist, very wise therapist, who said consciousness loves contrast. And I transitioned, I'll say transform, the common language is transition. I transitioned from a man living in a man's world, presenting as a man, to living as a woman, presenting as a woman very quickly. And that contrast sort of forced me to say, like, well, so many things have changed. What's the same? What part of me hasn't changed? And that was pivotal because I think this 3D world is a binary world. And our limited cognition operates on binary. And we have all these binaries, self and other, man, woman, et cetera, et cetera. And the first binary I think we encounter as humans developing is self and other as we separate from our mothers. And the second one, it forms at a very early age, is this awareness and identity of differences between men and women. There's mom and there's dad. And like we're put into these different categories. And the loosening of that binary, something that is very deep in my psyche, has been absolutely instrumental in me unraveling and loosening all the binaries. Because once I identified that gender is on a spectrum, there's no clear, bright lines in nature. Gender's on a spectrum. God, everything's on a spectrum. Our sexuality is on a spectrum. I identify as neurodivergent, and according to our culture, have many mental illnesses, which I don't view that way. But this is all on the spectrum. And I think that in recognizing that at a very core level has enabled me to, like I said, loosen my grip on that.
Mm-hmm. That's so fascinating. Yeah, and this third dimensional experience we're in is making us believe that everything is binary. And in reality, everything is on a spectrum. And we really get to choose where within that spectrum our true nature falls. And once we can align to that, that's something I'm playing with a lot. It's like, who am I here? Who am I there? What really feels aligned with my truth? And how can I lean more into that versus pretending or trying to force myself into a structure that I was told I'm supposed to fit in that never fit me in the first place?
Yeah. And what comes to mind as you say that too is a fourth dimension, which is, I think, time. I mean, I think of it as the fourth dimension. And recognizing even that is a social construct. And we can get into this if you want. I think it's worthwhile because it's been an important part of my spiritual journey, is this what's commonly called a psychotic break, a manic episode, a psychotic break, where I experienced time very differently. I experienced this 3D world very differently, and everything is relative. Einstein told us this long ago, and we know that intellectually, or I knew that intellectually, but to experience that, again, was like to see that there is a different time, there is a different way to be in the world that is not constrained to the one that we're normally operating on. Ram Dass talks about this as different channels of consciousness. Like at the one channel, we're here in the 3D world on the time that we all understand, and you dial it up to a different channel and things change. We perceive reality, what we call reality, differently.
I mean, you and I have had a lot of conversations around consciousness and what reality really is. And you've shared a little bit about how you experience time in a different way and almost came to the conclusion that time is not what we think it is in this linear way. Would you be open to sharing a little bit about the experience you had?
Yeah. Just over a year ago, there were a lot of factors that came together about a year ago that primed me. I had been undiagnosed bipolar And after the election, frankly, I can point to that as the date when things started to unravel. And I don't fully understand the process and what was going on in my mind. But what it opened up to me was, God, it's so hard for me to describe this experience, but I really literally experienced a different reality. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. I've had lots of experiences with both of those. I was literally operating and feeling, experiencing a different reality that had a different time to it and was like out of sync with this reality. And the house was the same. The people were the same. Again, everything was the same. But I was like 1 degree off, or like just slightly off of and operating according to a different set of rules in my mind. And because it was so real, it loosened the grip on like, gosh, what is real and what is not real? Because that experience was just as real to me. And the memories, gosh, in a lot of ways, the memories of that experience are just as potent to me. And I'm still integrating it. You know, we talked a lot about that. It was very traumatic. It was very dramatic. It was very public. It was very hard on the people around me and my family in particular. But it was a gift. And I believe that because I've had this experience of actually living, I'll say I actually lived in a different reality, and again, loosened this sort of fixed mindset that I had that this is all there is, or this is the only way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Many people don't have the vocabulary to talk about that when they're going through some kind of a psychotic experience or having a mental illness. And you have shared with me very eloquently in the past exactly what happened and how you perceived time and space in that time. And it just makes me wonder if science and Western medicine that's so good at reproducing things, improving things, and labeling things and diagnosing things, if there's something like a glitch in the matrix sometimes, and maybe those are not psychotic breaks, but it's us experiencing time, space, reality, maybe even dimensions in a different way, and then coming back. And I'm not a professional whatsoever. It's just from my perspective, I'm just holding curiosity for what some of those mental illnesses potentially could be. I personally have experienced depression to the point of being suicidal multiple times in my life. And every time I, for myself, came to the realization that it was my higher self or spirit or God or the universe or whatever you want to call it, that was giving me a full stop. It's like, you are no longer in alignment with your purpose. Let's stop, give you this depression so you can regroup, have a new vision, and move forward in a different way. And that's how I perceived it at the time, rather than a mental illness, and eventually was able to re-envision my future and come back to this experience that my soul supposedly agreed to be in this third dimensional time-space reality right now, incarnated in this physical body that people identify as Nadja.
I love everything you said. And I think it's so problematic to label these things as mental illness. If you go back to wisdom traditions, and particularly indigenous cultures, they recognize that these experiences were, using kind of modern language, spiritual emergence. Mm-hmm. They appreciated these experiences that people had. They revered them. People that had them often became the shaman or the spiritual leaders. And that's true, actually, if you look back in cultures today that accept trans women and, you know, trans people, been around as long as human beings have. And if you go and look at old societies or new societies where trans people exist, they often occupy a special place in the culture. And I think, well, if I could just riff on that with myself a little bit, as you know, Nadja, I have a theory on everything, but if I look like social, cultural evolution and how things evolve in nature, homogeny is not a strength in natural systems. diversity is a strength in natural systems. And it's the same in human systems, diversity. And I think that just as, for example, I don't know, indigenous North Americans might have seen an albino buffalo. I mean, they didn't understand the science, I don't believe, because, it's a different way of looking at the world. But I think they understood intuitively that that genetic sort of mutation represents health in the system.
Mm-hmm.
When you see mutations, you realize that this is a growing, evolving system. And I think that's the case here, where these sort of breaks or these different views into reality or into our own sense of perception, it shows us that this spectrum of experiences is available to us, and that what we experience in that one, again, calling the 3 or 4D world, is just one way of many to be human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with you on that very much about the importance of diversity. And we just live in such a world where everything needs to be in one camp or another. And we start associating with that. One of my guests here in this podcast, Monica Guzman, is specifically talking about how we're siloing and othering. And it's just amazing how good we are at trying to find people that are just like us and then holding judgment against people that are different, when in reality, that's really truly where the magic comes from. And I want to go back a little bit to something we started touching on. So living life as a woman, and specifically because I am a woman, I have experienced a lot of the things that you and I talked about in the past, is different from living life as a man. And one of the things is it takes more time to get ready with the makeup that we do. And again, not all the women do it, but the majority do. And there is a certain expectation. And after you and I had a conversation about some of those things, I was thinking of the importance of connection. And connection is so important to us in this world. We need it. We grow in our mothers, and then we have that connection, and that stays until at some point we have to start individuating and realizing we're different. So connection is huge. And as a woman, to be feeling seen, to be feeling loved, to be feeling connected, there's a certain expectation of what we're supposed to look like. And so it takes more effort to be a woman than to be a man. A man can just roll out of bed and be ready. A woman, for the most part, has to spend more time. Also, the safety. I never feel safe when I walk alone at night. I have a really good sense of what's happening behind me, and I listen very closely. I look back. I try to not walk around alone in a city where I feel I'm not safe at night, or in a parking garage. I'm just curious what your experience is, having lived 5 decades in a male body and now in a female body, and how you're perceiving that difference.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was trying to think, is there anything that I find easier living as a woman than I did easier as a man? And I can't come up with a single thing. You mentioned getting ready, and that seems trivial, but it's a lot of time. And as a woman, if you go out, you dressed different ways, you immediately experience the different ways you are perceived in the world, and even how you perceive yourself due to these, as you said, expectations. But everything's harder. The workplace, I never experienced challenges in the workplace. And now I've experienced transphobia in the workplace several times. Everything is harder. Everything is harder. With the connection, I want to go back and pull this thread into connection and maybe tie it back to some other things we talked about. Actually, now that I think about it and talk, there is a way in which being a woman is easier. And in the right context, in the right spaces, as a woman, I am allowed access to all of my emotions. And when I say unconditional love that I've gotten from my girlfriends, I can show up, and I have shown up, distraught and in tears. I've shown up euphoric and happy. And having that full range of human emotions and experiences, I think, is what allows us to connect with each other. As a man, the only acceptable emotion that I ever felt, and it's again very common in my age, my vintage of men and older, is that anger is the only acceptable emotion. And of course, for women, it's the opposite. Anger is not acceptable. Allowing myself to have these emotions and accepting these emotions, that to me is really like the crux of humaning better after transition, is that I get to be sad. I get to be happy. I get to take joy and pleasure in my appearance. I get to love women at a level that is very, very intimate and not sexual, which I think is very difficult in kind of our traditional society. Maybe there's more that you want to drill on that. I probably lost track of the question, but that's just some things that kind of came up as you were talking.
Yeah, just feeling our emotions is such a beautiful thing. And I love it when men have the ability to cry, when men have the ability to become vulnerable and feel safe to do that. And, I have had many conversations with women who still don't quite feel comfortable when a man gets truly vulnerable. They still don't quite know yet how to hold that space, because there's still that expectation that the man and, quote unquote, the divine masculine is the strong warrior. And when the inner child comes out of the divine masculine, which is part of the vulnerability, is that inner child, that goofiness, that part that could potentially embarrass someone. Being able to hold that, to me, is truly like holding that space for the divine and the vulnerable and creating that container of safety. And I grew up with a brother, so I saw a lot of the goofiness, and he's a very accomplished, beautiful, grounded human being, and he still gets goofy with me. And I can imagine how if he does that with a partner, that could potentially be perceived as embarrassing. And to me, it isn't, because it's just so beautiful that that's available. And I'm trying to figure out, what would it take for society to get to a place that we can actually love that goofiness in a male as much as we do in a female? Because as a female, we have the opportunity to express that more. And I know you talk about the wounded masculine as well. And what comes up when I share that?
Well, there's a couple things that come up again when you talk about this notion that the divine masculine is the powerful, the warrior. Well, in my experience, there is nothing more powerful than the divine feminine. It looks different, it feels different, but it is a very powerful force. It is the energy of creation, bringing new life into this world. And it's immensely powerful. So I'll get to the piece of like, what does it take? I think what it takes at a societal level begins with the individual. And not that, they're mutually exclusive, but we each can interrogate these assumptions that we've made. Most of everything that we're talking about in these notions of what a man is or a woman, this is all social conditioning, and it's deeply baked into our psyche. And so much of this happens at a subconscious level. So it takes both, like at a conscious level, questioning these things, interrogating them, making an attempt to view the world differently. But then I think it also takes another piece, practices like meditation, plant medicines, breath work, psychedelics, whatever, some of these tried and true paths to get at what is beneath the surface and surface those assumptions and this conditioning that's oftentimes outside of our conscious ability. Like we move from conscious incompetence to unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. And then once we can unearth these things, then we can start to work with them. But again, that takes self-love. That takes giving ourselves grace and realizing that I still am burdened, I'll say, with significant unconscious bias, implicit bias. You can't live, I don't think, as a human in our society, in these systems, and not come away with biases. I think as white people, we have to confront our internalized racism, everything along the way. I still am battling my internalized misogyny and transphobia and ableism and ageism and racism and to me, this kind of two-prong approach. There's the intellectual cognitive piece, but then there's the piece of like, what does it really take to change my behavior? I think of it in like the DEI work or any other work where it's like, you can learn this stuff, you can know this stuff. I understand white fragility. I understand racism at a cognitive level, but to actually embody and change the way that I perceive the world and experience the world, that to me is the work. Of course, as a society, we have to even get there intellectually. But then as we get there intellectually, we're left with, now what? I'm aware of my racism. I'm aware of my misogyny, but I feel helpless to do anything about it. And it's that kind of tension there where I think we have to be gentle with ourselves, be patient with ourselves, and surround ourselves also with people that are gracious, but also hold us to account and say, that's racist, that's misogynist or whatever. And then to take that to heart and start to examine, like, where is that coming from in me? And not be afraid to dig into that.
Yeah.
And accept that, yeah, I accept I'm a racist. I accept that I'm a misogynist and transphobic. And only in that acceptance can I start to become aware of it and then see how in ways that probably served me because of the way I was raised and to succeed in this world and to make the conscious choice to start to change that and risk not being in sync with the dominant culture, which is, of course, white, male, colonialistic, able-bodied, het, cis, normal, all the things.
Yeah, it's so fascinating how many layers we have to work through and how much bias we have. And what I always find the easiest way to that next level of acceptance is to surround myself with increasingly more diversity. And I don't have nearly enough diversity as I wish I had. And some of the guests that have been on my podcast are talking about travel, just going out into the world and experiencing different cultures. I feel like if we go out there, we're open to other people, we're curious, we're just holding curiosity for what that might look like. And we start having connections and relationships with people that are different than us. The more we realize how our lives get enriched, how our biases start slowly falling away, and how much beauty there is and how much beauty we're withholding from ourselves by locking ourselves into this paradigm that we were conditioned into believing is the only truth.
Yeah, I'll say, it is beautiful. Come on in. The water's great. But there's something you said that I want to get to, being surrounded by more and more diverse people. I've spoken a lot about in the DEI context about these sorts of things. And the word that I use is proximity. Being proximate with people who are different than you. And you don't have to travel to do that. And I think it's problematic to travel and do that, honestly, in a lot of ways, if you're not doing that consciously. Me going to Africa and doing a first-class safari and staying at the nicest hotels, I don't think exposed me to anything in particular along those lines. But being proximate with people who are different than you, and those differences, again, I think I would invite people to explore those differences at every level, differences in age. I mean, I've got friends at many different generations and ableism and neurodiversity, and at every single level, having a willingness to encounter those differences, and most importantly, a willingness to be changed by them. But I think the first thing we feel, I'll say just the first thing that I feel, and I know other people have reported this, first thing we feel is like fear. And that fear may not always become conscious, but as humans, I think we've evolved to fear things that are different than us. And so that sort of othering and fearing others, I think that's deeply embedded in us, and it takes the real work. But overcoming fear, that's how I've really defined my journey, other than a journey towards self-love. It's continuing to come into something that is scary, that I'm afraid of, and then push through it. As the Buddhists would say, the obstacle is the path. And for me, fear, overcoming that fear of differences, fear of being uncomfortable, that's the one. And recognizing that when I'm uncomfortable and I'm angry or judging or whatever, that the real place that comes from is fear, and being willing to override that.
Yeah, fear is such a powerful thing that has so much control over us, and people can have control over us by creating fear in us. And just really moving from that fear timeline to the love timeline and start accepting and loving. And yeah, life is so much better in the love timeline. So we are coming to the end of this conversation, and I would like to give you a chance for our audience to find you and see if you have any offerings or places you want to point them to.
Yeah, I'm very findable. I'm committed to being visible in this world, which again is overcoming fear in the current climate. In terms of the offering level, I will always take calls and questions about a trans experience and understanding transness. I think, speaking of shame, a lot of people want to understand this more. It's foreign to a lot of people, and rightly so it was to me. But I personally have made it a mission in my life to make it a safe space with me, be a safe person to ask those questions. Like, you can ask me anything and I will not get offended. I will tell you if something you say will possibly offend other trans people, but I will invite any of your listeners to contact me if they have questions specifically around my experiences being trans and how to relate to trans people, or if they've got trans friends or children. So that's the first thing I want to offer. And then beyond that, I live in Bellingham and I consider myself now a community builder. And I hope to have an offering of a third space in Bellingham where people can play at the intersection of art, style, and community, which are three of my passions. And stay tuned on that. That's currently under the name Dress Up Bellingham. So I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. You can Google search me. I've been on other podcasts. If you want to find me, you can find me. And I always love conversations and connections. I'm a connector, as are you, Nadja. So I love it.
Beautiful. And I will put all the links in the show notes so people can find you. And yeah, I love the new Instagram account that you created, Dress Up Bellingham. You go into the streets of Bellingham, you find the funkiest, funnest, coolest, artsy people, and you just ask them about their outfits and their art. And you have such a good way of unlocking the beauty in people, and they're really responding incredibly beautiful to you. So highly recommend looking at that Instagram account, and I'll put a link to that as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And I have one final question. If you could go back in time and give a message to a younger version of you, what would you tell him?
Gosh, a single message. I guess I would say what comes immediately to the top of my mind is anything is possible. Anything is possible. I didn't ever dream about becoming a woman because I thought it was impossible. It seemed and felt impossible. And here I am. And so that is like evidence to me that anything is possible.
Beautiful. And so it is. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and your generous time and all the wisdom you're sharing and just leading by example. Thank you. I really appreciated this conversation with you and enjoyed every minute of it.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Wake Up Protocol. If you like what you heard, share this episode with 3 people who need to hear this message. And if you want to go deeper, head to thewakeuprotocol.com and sign up for our email list. That's where we share behind the scenes insights, bonus resources, exclusive invites, and the kind of guidance we only send to our community. And if this is the last thing you hear from us, all we'd like to say is keep going, trust yourself, follow your heart. Until next time, have a safe and happy journey.